Welcome, everybody, to the Cover 2 podcast. Once again, my name is Nenad.
And I'm Jared Smith.
And guys, we have another podcast coming at you via quarantine. We have two topics today that we're going to discuss. One will be the announcement by the National Hockey League that there will be officially a 24-team playoffs. 7 teams eliminated, 7 teams. Seasons are done. The regular season is officially finished. Some details to iron out before we actually have a season coming up. But the NHL is the first team to pass the so-called Phase 1 with this new coronavirus kind of sports we have going on. Our other topic will be the constant negotiations between the MLB owners and the MLB players. We have information now that's suggesting giant pay cuts, way more than Jared and I thought would be going to these players. So we will discuss that because we've changed our mind on some things after seeing some of these brutal details on how low these players are.
You've changed your mind. I've always been with the players on this, all right? So let's not get it twisted. I think you finally seen the light and realized that these owners are asking for a little too much.
Oh, they're scheming. They are scheming for sure. But yeah, so those are the two topics we are going to start. We're going to go back to the NHL right here to start the podcast. Gary Bettman via Zoom, he's the commissioner of the NHL, came out and announced all of this. So this is as official as you're going to get. It's the first sport here in the United States that's really came out, besides the NFL, which really hasn't made any changes besides the virtual offseason. This is the first league that was stopped to now we kind of see a restart. We don't expect the NHL to start until around July. There are some details to iron out, like I mentioned. But, Jared, what are your thoughts on that we finally have a sport that is kind of moving forward here, and it's the first sign of good news here for sports coming back?
Yeah, I'm excited, obviously, because this is just another step in the right direction to see live sports, whether we have no fans at all, or whether there's, 1,000 fans in the stands or in the arena. The fact that we're moving in the right direction is a positive. And I think a lot of leagues, the NFL, the NBA, Major League Soccer, all of these leagues are kind of looking at each other to see, okay, who's going to make the first move? Who's going to officially say, all right, our league, our season is back on? Because I think the NHL is kind of the guinea pig, right? And they're going to test this situation out, go straight into the playoffs. And you can guarantee the NBA, the NFL, Major League Soccer, they're all going to be looking at the NHL to see how they handle these situations. If a player or if someone in the organization tests positive for COVID, what is their criteria? What is their protocol? Can they still continue with games? Because it's almost inevitable that someone at some point will test positive for the coronavirus. So what are the steps after that, right? And I think the NFL Players Association director, Boras Smith, yesterday was interviewed and said that he's like, yeah, of course we're looking at other leagues to see how they're handling the situation. Yeah. So I'm excited, but I'm also, anxious to see, okay, if the NHL does actually get going and we see a game started, how quickly are these other leagues going to jump on board and try to, copy what the NHL is doing so that they can get their leagues going?
Yeah, and I should mention something as far as when I say leagues, I'm talking about team sports where, we've seen the PGA start up. We saw Tiger and Peyton Manning and Tom Brady and Phil Mickelson play the other day in a golf tournament, right? We've seen NASCAR go on. The UFC has ran 3 events and only had 1 coronavirus positive test to one of their athletes, and he was expecting it. So, it's looked good for the, the kind of one-person sports, but it's a whole different thing with a team and coaches and all that stuff and how they're going to have call-ups and things like that. Luckily for the NBA and the NHL, they're kind of near the playoffs, so the call-ups and all that stuff won't really be a factor. For baseball, which we'll get to a little bit later, that's a big issue, trying to figure out all these minor league systems and all that stuff. It's going to be interesting. But to give some details, so again, almost all this information I'm going to list, by the way, is from a couple articles on ESPN. Just want to attribute them right away. This is not information I came up with off the top of my head. Just want to attribute it so I don't have to say it every single time. But so while the players of the NHL have agreed on the 2014 playoff format, the Players Association has not formally approved any actual return to finish the season. Like I mentioned, finish the postseason, as this would be called. The league and the NHL PA still must figure out health and safety protocols and solve other issues, including where to play. So here's something interesting. So they have a couple hub cities that they're looking at. They have not chosen any. The hub cities are that they are considering Chicago, Columbus, Dallas, Edmonton, Las Vegas, Los Angeles, Minneapolis, Pittsburgh, Toronto, and Vancouver. A lot of people are expecting them to pick a U.S. city because Canada's restrictions are a lot more. And the government has actually mandated a 14-day quarantine for anybody that tests positive, which would really mess with whatever the NHL wants to do. And there's, obviously there's 7 NHL teams in Canada as well. So it's the one league that's really going to be affected by that. I do have the teams. I'm trying to see. There is only one team, though, that did not make the playoffs from Canada as well. So there's 6 teams being affected by this rule. It's a legitimate problem. I think if you had most of the Canadian teams, maybe they would think about possibly moving to another spot or something like that. But yeah, so I would really say it's going to be Chicago, Columbus, Dallas, Vegas, Los Angeles, or Minneapolis, or Pittsburgh as well. What are your thoughts on that? The fact that the NHL is going to use hub cities, much like we've heard with the NBA and with the MLB early on in negotiations.
Right. My first thought to that is it's an idea, and how is it really going to play out? Because how are you going to are you going to have multiple teams staying at a same hotel or like a same resort? Players obviously aren't going to be able to be with their families. How long are you going to be away from your families? What if a player has a newborn? And like there's so many dynamics just from a family standpoint. And there have been players from multiple sports that have come out and said, hey, I don't want to be away from my families. I know that Major League Baseball players specifically have come out and said that. I know originally and one of the first plans, Major League Baseball said they were going to have players basically be quarantined only with their team for about 4 months. And players were like, hell no. Like, I'm not doing that. That's
kind of crazy too.
That's crazy.
Yeah.
Obviously, the NHL isn't going to be that long of a time period, but still, is it a week, 2 weeks potentially if you make it all the way into the finals of the Stanley Cup? Is it a month? So I think the family aspect is a big thing in all of this. Really, I kind of lost track and forgot that there were 7 teams that played in Canada, and you're right, 6 of them are going to be making this 2014 playoff. So it does make more sense that these games are played in the U.S. It's any one of the cities to me who, like, I don't know, it doesn't matter, like if it's in L.A. or if it's in Dallas, who really cares at that point? I think it's just how can you get all of these players and team staff all in a hotel together? Are there going to have to be multiple teams staying at the same hotel? How are they going to be quarantined? Are they going to be able to go outside and do things outside of practice and outside of hockey? Or are they going to be forced to pretty much stay inside so that there's less of a chance of them getting COVID, right? Because their main focus, their main goal is to play games. So do they get freedom to go out and be human beings, or are they being told, hey, you guys have to basically stay inside and you can only travel when you're traveling with the team?
Yeah, no, and again, none of these details besides the 2014 playoff pretty much have been ironed out as far as the testing goes. Here's another couple of tidbits in the article. It did say the games would be held inside empty arenas at 2 hub cities. So there will actually be 2 cities used in this. Players, staff, and others, don't know who those others are, would be housed during the season restart. And again, like you're mentioning, it's different from baseball and potentially football because, after what is going to be a 8 5-game series, 8 teams are eliminated. So, and then you just go into the 16-team playoff. After that, obviously, another 8 teams. So, right. These guys aren't really going to be, most of these players and are not going to be away from their families that long. So I think if that's the issue, you look at it as almost like a long road trip. Like eventually you do have to get over that. If you can't stay away from your family for 1 or 2 weeks, why are you playing in the NHL anyways, right? At that point, like you're going for a long time. So I don't know if that's necessarily the issue. I think, yeah, obviously if you're going to the Stanley Cup final and you're going for months and months, you have that joy of going to a Stanley Cup final without fans, but you also are staying away from your family. So yeah, it will be interesting. And the hubs will have secure arenas, hotels, and practice facilities, and there will be aggressive coronavirus testing and protocols at each site. So similar to what the UFC did in Jacksonville and what they plan to do in Las Vegas and potentially other places. But yeah, so again, this all will be ironed out, and I do believe that there won't be this big issue with pay as well, because I think most of these players have been paid most of the season. I think there was about 14 games left in the regular season for most teams. So these players, you're losing a couple $1,000s here and there. I don't think it's a big deal. Playoff bonuses will be available for this as well for the NHL. So yeah, so interesting on that. I just want to list this. The teams that were eliminated were the Buffalo Sabres.
Boston, whoa, man.
They're I think they're number one seed in the whole thing. The Buffalo Sabres, Ottawa Senators, Detroit Red Wings, New Jersey Devils, and all of the California teams. So
and all of the
yeah, and no, it's funny because I actually listed this. I actually put LOL next to it. When you look at every Western Conference team made it besides the California teams to this playoffs. That's how bad those three teams were. So in California, I'm sure Gavin Newsom is excited as hell that we're not.
Right, because he doesn't have to deal with this.
Yeah. So it'd be interesting if the hub city ends up being LA after all that, right? The teams get eliminated and then.
Yeah. See, now LA you would think would be out because
I'm surprised
why would LA be a hub city, because there's no one here. Everyone would have to be traveling here. That wouldn't make sense. I would almost rule LA out right now.
What the reason the NHL listed LA is because of obviously multiple playoff runs by the Kings and Ducks the last couple of years have been fairly successful as far as getting, drawing ratings and all that stuff, but that's not as important. The housing of the teams for the multiple series, the Kings going to the Stanley Cup, media, the NHL All-Star game was in Los Angeles a couple of years ago too. So I think they're citing that as with LA Live and the JW Marriott and places like that. We know that as being, a kind of hub. The teams just walk across the street to Staples Center every day. So really, talking about coronavirus testing, LA actually might be one of the best spots besides maybe a Las Vegas. So yeah, it'll be interesting. But just wanted to list the teams there. So every other team that I did not mention has made the playoffs. There were two teams that did not vote for the 2014 playoff out of the 31 teams. That is the Tampa Bay Lightning and Carolina Hurricanes. I was trying to figure out why Tampa Bay didn't vote for it, but Carolina, the head coach, decided that their seeding is terrible and that they were on a run going into this last couple of seasons. They don't understand why they couldn't have just played the 14 more games because
they think that they would have, if they would have played their regular season, they would have, had a better record, but now they're getting kind of screwed.
Exactly. I can't really look up what the seeding is right now just based on the fact that they haven't actually officially set up the seeding. But Carolina, I remember seeing odds on a couple betting websites. They were one of the worst because of how low they were seated. So, makes sense for Carolina. I really don't know why Tampa Bay is so mad. I think they're the second seed in the East, and they were 8 points behind Boston for the seed in their own. So I don't understand that. But those were the two teams that didn't vote for it. Every other team voted for it, which means that every team eliminated voted for this as well. What are your thoughts on that? That 7 teams essentially voted for their season to end.
Yeah. I think it was more of a camaraderie thing. Like, hey, if we were in and other teams weren't, we would expect those other teams to also pick the slack and say yes. So I think it was just a community decision. You're right. Listen, Carolina, you're in the playoffs, right? All you need to do is get in. You never know what can happen. Yeah. So I think if there's a way that they can safely play, I don't know, stop bitching and go play. But right, for the 7 teams that didn't get in, like I said, I think it was just a community thing where they all chipped in and said, hey, we would want other teams to vote this in if we were in the playoffs and they weren't. So nothing more than that. I don't, like I said, it's a way for hockey to come back and play. So even if you're not playing, technically you still want to see your sport succeed and still go on. It's kind of a no-brainer. Yeah,
what's interesting is that the Kings actually ended up on a long winning streak that potentially, if they would have kept going on a roll like that, they would have been one of the 24 teams. That was the teams that surprised me, and as well as San Jose, who doesn't have a draft pick in the first round this year. It goes to Ottawa. So Ottawa will actually have 2 top 5 picks, which is crazy this year. But San Jose doesn't even have a top 7 draft pick now, and they still voted to not try. That was just kind of interesting that San Jose just gave up. I mean, I guess you're talking about camaraderie. Man, they gave up everything.
Right.
Like, right. So that was surprising to me. But the other teams, it does make sense. And your season, don't put your players at risk and all this stuff. Maybe that's what San Jose in the end came out to. Plus, Northern California has been, we know this, has been very strict with their guidelines on players. So maybe that was another one. They just didn't want to deal with that. Okay, so moving on to how this is going to be played. I mentioned this earlier that there's going to be 5-game series, but let me just outline the whole thing here. So the top 4 teams in each conference will play separate round-robin tournaments to determine seeding in the first round. So these are the teams that won't be playing initially, like the top 4 seeds, the top teams. These will be played with regular season overtime and shootout rules. The remaining 16 teams, the teams that will, in a sense, be in the playoffs, they'll be seeded by conference and will play best of 5 play-in series. So a lot like the wild card game in the MLB, for example. And these games will be played with playoff overtime rules. So we have a couple teams essentially starting the playoffs, right, and others that are playing for seeding for the top seed.
That are already in.
Yeah, so because I think when we hear these proposals about 2014 playoff, I was like, so there's going to be 8 teams just sitting there waiting. That's horrible.
Right.
But they are going to be playing. Obviously, you have the risk of injury, but essentially those teams kind of just continue the regular season in some ways. So everybody that made the quote unquote 2014 playoff will be playing once this all starts. So your thoughts on that? Fair, right? For everybody?
Well, fair. I also like that idea, the fact that no one's been playing for the last 2 months. You need to knock off that rust, right? You need to get back into some type of shape. For hockey players, I think they're also at somewhat of a disadvantage. I don't know what their normal, cardio routine is or workout routine is, but if you're a basketball player, a lot of dudes probably have basketball gyms in their house.
Sure.
Not really sure if anyone has a hockey arena or, an ice skating rink in their house where they can go skate around, right?
Yeah.
So I think these guys do need to come back and need at least a couple weeks of training and then, kind of knock the rust off, get some games under your belt before you just throw them into the wolves and straight into the playoffs. Because what I see happening is I can see the first couple of games being really sloppy, being really ugly. Who knows? They could be really high scoring or they could be 1-0, but I can see some ugly games in the beginning until these teams get going. So yes, for the teams who are just playing for seeding, I think it's beneficial for them to just play some games, get back into a rhythm, and all that. So I'm all for that. There shouldn't be a team that, gets a bye week or something like that. You've had 2 months of bye weeks going on here. So everyone should be back playing.
Yeah, and by the way, if you're wondering, because with the top 4 teams in each conference, you're essentially going to have 3 games played by each of these teams. So you may think it's more, but it's only 3 games that these teams have been playing. Let's say 2 teams end up 2-1, right, to seed. It would then go to regular season points. So, for example, the Boston Bruins had 100 points. Tampa Bay Lightning had 92. If they end up with the same record in the round robin tournament that they're playing, the Bruins would still be the higher seed, even if Tampa Bay beat them in a game. So that's the way that will be calculated. A little bit like FIFA, like the FIFA World Cup. If you think about it that way, that's how this tournament is essentially going to be played. And then you have teams playing in. I also, Jared, I agree with you. I don't have any problem with the teams starting the best of 5 play-in series because half those teams shouldn't have made the playoffs. So they can't really complain about having to just start in the playoffs immediately, right?
Yeah, you're getting lucky that you're getting, put into this tournament. And now you got to
There are some teams, I'm going to look at these stats. I didn't even look at these before. I just want to see how bad some of these teams were that were there.
I swear, if there's a team that's below 500 that got into the playoffs, I don't care
Well,
what
okay.
sport it is.
100%. There's one I can see right here. It's the
If
team.
you're below 500, you should not be making the playoffs. No matter what, don't care what sport it is, you don't deserve to make it.
Yeah. Okay. So the two teams that you're gonna have the biggest gripe with. So now, the NHL, they obviously do it by points. So an overtime loss still does
You
count.
still get
You get a
1
point.
point.
So there's a lot of teams that actually, quote unquote, have losing records in the NHL. But the two teams that I think, if you're looking at this, have the biggest advantage of making this, Chicago Blackhawks ended up with 72 points. That is so the Blackhawks and Arizona Coyotes, 72 and 74 points. That's at least 4 points below everybody else, and you'd never make the playoffs. The Chicago Blackhawks are last in their division, and still made the playoffs. And
so that means that everyone in their division made the playoffs.
Every single person, yeah. And then the worst team to make the playoffs is the Montreal Canadiens, 71 points, 31 and essentially 49 record.
That's so awful. That's so awful. They shouldn't make it. They should just start with 16 teams then. See, I don't like that, man. I get like you want to have, as many teams as possible and you're going to do this round robin. And so you need, nah, man, get out of here with that.
There's three teams that really weren't in the race. Montreal, they were 7 points behind the next team in the East too. They really probably wouldn't have made the playoffs. Here's the thing though, Jared. Remember, the St. Louis Blues last year went from last place to win the Stanley Cup Finals. So if that makes you feel any better about it. They didn't start their run 14 games left, but if a team does do it, it doesn't hurt me as much to watch that after seeing what the Blues did. And I've seen my Kings be the 8th seed and win the Stanley Cup as well. So not horrible to me. I wanted to see they do have the matchups. I expect Montreal just to be smoked in the first round. They will play Pittsburgh. So that you're playing Sidney Crosby and Evgeny Malkin in the first round. That's pretty tough. That will be a tough go at it. Pittsburgh obviously won 2 Stanley Cups in a row a couple years ago. So, at least they get the unluck of the draw there with the best team.
Good.
But that's deserved.
What they deserve. That's what your record deserves.
100%. But yeah.
So when you were looking up those standings, and I don't think that you've mentioned this yet. I thought this was interesting. Some of the new protocols. It would allow for a maximum of 6 players to train at team facilities at once. On-ice sessions are for players only without coaches or other team personnel. So in a sense, the players are kind of coaching themselves or, in hockey, you have 5 players on ice at once, right? So to have 6 players training.
Well, six, because you have the goalie.
You have the goalie. Okay. All right.
So 3-on-3 going on with a coach sitting there at goal.
Right. Well, the coach, it says on-ice sessions are for players only, no coaches, no other team personnel, media and agents.
I am guessing that it will be until they get to these hub cities. Essentially, you're just doing skating, right? Maybe you could set up one of the we've seen in like the trick shot competitions and stuff. We've seen those things they put in front of the goal. Maybe you only score if you like some. There's ways they can do it. You could do 3-on-3 hockey. You could do 5-man rushes, stuff like that. 3-on-2. What you could practice like scenarios, right? Maybe you could have a couple shootout scenarios and stuff like that. But yeah, until they get to these hub cities, it's gonna be difficult. We're gonna see this in almost every single sport, right? Like we're seeing the NFL's already being affected, where the rookies don't get together in camp. The MLB is gonna have a spring training where, actually MLB probably will be the most unaffected by this. But the NBA, again, what they say, 4 people allowed.
Yeah.
So, it's just the way it is, right? It's going to be the most fair for everybody, right? I guess if you have better players on your team, that helps, but that would help you in any realm. So, I don't see a really problem with that, but I see once they get to these hub cities, say a Los Angeles, Las Vegas, everybody's training at the same place and stuff like that, and they're all tested negative, assumingly. So, at that point, we'll just see, but. Yeah, and then just last tidbit on this, Boston is the number 1 seed in the whole thing. So they will be, quote unquote, the home team, but really, who cares?
Right. Yeah, you're not going to have fans and there's no home ice advantage. So, good for them. They get to be the number 1 seed. They should then, in a sense, have one of the easiest paths to get to the Stanley Cup final.
But again, they still, they say they go 0-3 they'll play Tampa Bay, Montreal, and Florida, though. They should beat Toronto and Florida. So Boston is 100 points, Tampa Bay 92, Toronto 81, Florida 78. So Toronto would have made the playoffs normally. Florida is the one where you'd look at possibly a wild card there getting in. But, so Boston should go at least 2-1, for example. But, hey, they go 0-3, they're the fourth seed, which is that's the one mark, that's the one marker you have right there. But very, very interesting stuff. I'm glad we actually have a sport that has something like this set up, right? Because we'll move on to our next topic, which is the MLB, which is still arguing about stuff. And so, let's just move into that. We've talked for weeks now about the MLB starting a season, about these pay cuts. We've complained about the players complaining about their pay cuts. So I'll just start it by this. So under the March agreement that the MLB has already agreed to, the cut, for example, is essentially 50% of your salary, right? So players like Mike Trout and Garrett Cole, who are making $36 million, would then make 18. Anybody making the league minimum of just over $563,000 would be making $285,000, which is a little more than 50%, or a little less than 50% cut, but we're talking about decimals here. That's what it is right now. That is for an 82-game regular season. Makes sense because it's 162 games.
Yeah, can't really argue with that. We're cool.
Makes about sense. And so I'm just going to put this out there. The economic proposal that everybody's been talking about, that the players and owners have been arguing about this week, would look like this. So again, anybody making the $5,603,000 MLB minimum would make less than 50% now, $262,000. That doesn't matter because a player like Mike Trout that makes $36 million in this economic cut would now make $8 million. Yes, that is a single number, $8 million. That's more than 25%, or that's less than 25% of your salary.
Yeah, I was going to say that's more than 25%.
I think it's 22.5 or something like that. Jared, your thoughts? Have you changed your mind essentially about blaming the players for disagreeing with this?
But listen, I've never been one to blame the players in the first place. When it
comes to money, even more? Like, do you want to, like?
I know this is a debate show, and the point of us is to go back and forth and give our opinions. All I need to say is hell no. Like in what world? Here's what I want to see. And I know that we talked about this off air for a minute, but I want to see the owners' numbers, right? And I know that, if you're the Yankees owner, your market and your revenue is going to be bigger than the Tampa Bay Rays, right? Because obviously they're in a smaller market. Their revenue and their team doesn't bring in the cash that the Yankees do. But I want to see these owners' numbers and how much money the owners are losing, because are the owners taking the same pay cut, right? Are they going, obviously, most of them are all billionaires, but are they taking a, 75% pay cut along with these players? Because then that would be fair to me, right? If everyone within the organization from the top to bottom is taking the same level pay cut, then it's tough to argue if you're a player. Yeah. But if the players are taking a 75% pay cut, yet the owners are still bringing in their normal paychecks, obviously, merchandise and concession sales and all that stuff, and fans at games, you're not going to get money from that. But if the owners are making, over 50% still or over 70%, then I think that's where the players have an issue with, listen, the players are saying, without us, these owners, they're not making money, right? So it has to be somewhat of a give and take. And yeah, no, if I'm a player, there is no way, nothing you could say to me that would make me sign this specific agreement that you just talked about.
Yeah, and we've seen players that make upwards of $30 million a year almost come out immediately and say no. And now at least it makes sense why Bryce Harper and Nolan Arenado and Blake Snell have come out and said, no, we didn't know the details. Now we know the details. The reason I even got on this topic is because I saw that Scott Boras recommended that all his clients refused this deal. And Scott Boras made over $1 billion on salaries last year. So we're talking about the cream of the crop, the Anthony Rendones, and multiple other players under his contracts. Bryce Harper.
He has 71 players just in Major League Baseball that he works with. So obviously, his word means a lot.
Yeah, no, it does. And we've had specifically Trevor Bauer came out and said, okay, let's not have owners get involved and putting their name out. Scott Boras does have a bigger voice than necessarily he should, even though he's not associated with the MLB. He doesn't work for Major League Baseball. He's just an agent. But he has, some of the best players in the major leagues and has had some of the best players in the major leagues. So his word matters. And if all of his players disagree with this, that's like I said, that's 70 players right there automatically no. And, there's only that's almost 3 teams worth of players right there saying no. You already have 10% of the league saying no, essentially right there. So if they all do agree.
Here, let me read a quote from Scott Boras because I thought this was interesting. And this is him literally taking a jab at the owners. He said, owners are asking, quote, owners are asking for more salary cuts to bail them out of the investment decisions they have made. If this was just about baseball, playing games would give the owners enough money to pay the players their full prorated salaries and run the baseball organization. The owners' current problem is a result of the money they borrowed when they purchased their franchises, renovated their stadiums, or developed land around their ballparks. This type of financing is allowed and encouraged by the MLB because it has resulted in significant franchise valuations. So basically what he's saying is because these owners have taken loans out to, kind of upgrade the ballpark or things around it, convention centers and that type of thing, the owners are asking for a bailout from the players. And obviously he is telling his players, hell no, right? The players aren't getting a share of the ballparks or anything that goes on in there. So why would the players bail these owners out? It doesn't make any sense.
No, it doesn't. And again, the players play for the owners. So why would you bail that? Why would you bail them out? It's their job to own the team. The employees don't need to give you money back. You know what I'm saying? It doesn't make much sense. I'm glad you said that because I remember reading something funny in this article. I just had so many notes written down that I didn't read. He cited the purchase. The Ricketts family, when they bought the Cubs, they redeveloped Wrigley. Wrigley Field looks so much different than it used to be. That was one of the reasons the Cubs have been against this, right? And really been because their stuff. I would think that the Dodgers will come in, and because they just made huge renovations for the All-Star game, that they might, come and say, well, we need money to fix this. Although the Dodgers, in something else that we might talk about at the end of this segment, they said they're not furloughing any employees like half the other teams have. So maybe you have these teams like the Yankees and Dodgers that are like, well, we have enough money, we could care less. We'll pay everybody their full salary if we want, right? Like at that point, I know the Dodgers owners. I followed them religiously almost since Magic Johnson and them bought the team. There's a lot of money. And it's one of the reasons the Dodgers have been in the World Series talks for the last couple of years, right? And same with the Yankees. But yeah, no, it is BS that the owners are asking for this. So here's the MLB's reasoning, part of the reasoning. Commissioner Rob Manfred, again, this is from the same ESPN article I've been talking about all this from. Commissioner Rob Manfred said that 40% of MLB's revenue is related to the game. And teams told the MLB Players Association on May 12th, that's 2 weeks ago, that the MLB would lose $640,000 for each game played in empty ballparks.
Wow.
And the MLB has also claimed that playing with prorated salaries in empty ballparks, which is what the agreed upon thing is right now, would cause a $4 billion loss and give major league players nearly 90% of the entire revenue. So, Jared, what are your thoughts on that? 90% of the money going to the players? I at least kind of see why the owners are trying to cut it a little more, right?
Yes, I don't know, man. There's something about owners in every league that they're so greedy. And listen, you're at 90%, that's a lot. Now, you want to ask players to take a pay cut from that. That makes sense to me. I really can't get over the fact that owners are really trying to nickel and dime these players. And that's why I said, I want to see what these owners are making, or I want to see what these owners would potentially be losing, right? Let's see their numbers. Let's see their facts. And then we can match it up because you can go online right now and look at Mike Trout's current contract. And obviously you just said, if this particular plan were to go into place, he would go from making 36 million to 8 million, right? We don't necessarily know what these owners make on an annual basis when you combine all of their revenue, right? So with the losses of no games played, nothing bought at concession stands, merchandise being down, everything that comes into play, what are these owners actually losing? And so I would like to see those numbers, and then I can make a better assessment as to where these owners stand. Maybe these owners actually have a better argument, but for right now, until we see that, it's tough for me to sit here and side with the owners on any of these negotiations.
Yeah, what's interesting too is, so I may have the math completely wrong on this, but what I got from this is that they said $4 billion, right? For the whole league, right? It has to be the whole league that's losing $4 billion because teams don't make $1 billion a year. That would essentially mean that these teams are only losing $130 million or so on this whole thing. In the grand scheme of things, I'm trying to figure out, is that that crazy of an amount? Or is it just because when you look at that, again, it's going from the fact that we don't know what they're making, right? But if the teams each are making $1 billion, right, a year on this whole thing, is losing 10% of that really it's got to be? I just really wonder. It's very interesting. We don't know, of course, because that's the way everything works, right? But it's it's definitely interesting. I was gonna bring up something really quickly. So I think I have this article correct right here. I'm trying to figure out the lowest net worth for the owners in the MLB. And I don't know if I could. I'm gonna be searching for it right now, but
it would have to be a small city team. I think you're looking at Baltimore, you're looking at Tampa Bay. Those are just two teams and names that kind of pop off my head. But like I said, with Major League Baseball, there's such a gap between the upper echelon teams, the Dodgers, the Yankees, the Cubs, even the Angels, because they're in California, as opposed to some of these other teams that just don't bring in the same type of revenue. So in football, even though obviously, the Cowboys, the Steelers, those kind of iconic franchises, do well, I don't think there's as big of a gap when you're looking at the Cowboys and, let's say, the Jaguars, for instance, right, who don't have the same revenue coming in, as opposed in baseball. I think that gap is a lot larger.
So, okay, I found a perfect article. It is literally from 7 days ago, ranking the MLB owners by net worth. So I'm not, even though the Mets owner doesn't make as much, there's a reported buy from a guy named Steve Cohen who has $14 billion in the bank. So I'm not going to put him in this. So the Reds owner, Bob Castellini, apparently his net worth is only $400 million. Now, I know that sounds like a lot, but let's say him losing $133 million, that's a lot, right? That's so the Padres, Ron Fowler, $500 million, Brewers, $700 million, Rays, $800 million. And there's a couple that also only have $1 billion in the bank too. That'd be the Mariners and the Royals. So, there's 20% of the league doesn't have the same bank that other teams do, right? We obviously have tons that we have many that have so much money that it wouldn't matter to them necessarily. But so that's what are your thoughts on that? There are some owners that will get severely affected by this. Is it fair to them that these lower five, if the rest of the owners could afford it? Is it fair? Right? Essentially 20% of owners really, really would be affected by this.
Well, then you're comparing it to the players, right? So you've got 15 or 20% of the players who make 25 to 30 million a year, the Mike Trouts, the Garrett Coles, those guys are going to be significantly affected as opposed to a player who potentially only makes $1 million or even less. I think originally you said a guy that makes like 500,000, he would go down to making essentially 250,000. So yes, that's a big deal for him. But still, when you're looking at the other side of the spectrum, someone that goes from making 36 million to 8 million, that's also a big deal. And you brought something up, when we were off air that I wanted to mention. Now, this is just more of a luxury, but let's say a player goes out, a Mike Trout goes out and buys a $50 million yacht, or, goes out and buys something so extravagant. And this is obviously before COVID came out, but
yeah,
there's these players, obviously they still have bills just like everyone else. Their bills might be bigger than most, right? Because typically they can afford it, but they're still having to, allocate their money and figure out how they're going to pay for things. Now, I don't feel sorry for them, but that doesn't mean that they still have bills to pay for and family members to take care of and all that as well. So, when they're doing their financials and they say, okay, well, I'm making 36 million this year, this is where I can allocate my money. And then all of a sudden they're going down to making 8 million. That's obviously a huge gap, right? So either way, even though it's on a larger scale, not that I feel for them, but it's, yes, there's a reason why a lot of these players have had pushback on it. And so, like I said, from the owner standpoint, you're right. I think I just compare it to the players. There's some owners that don't have as much money, right? They're not in the billions. They're in the 300 millions, 400 millions. So yes, a $130 million loss is going to be more significant to them. So maybe it's on a percentage scale, or maybe you have to be in a certain money bracket, right? So say you're in the $500 million bracket, then your percentage will be X amount. But if you're in the $2 billion bracket, your percentage will be X amount. And maybe
because when you look at some of these teams too, like they suffer, rebuilds and stuff like that because they can't afford the $40 million contracts that the MLB is producing now, right? So it would only be fair if those teams essentially, they were able to just pay their players the same thing. You're talking about percentages, though. There has to be more players that are going to be severely affected by this than owners, though. I said 20%, right? But when you're looking at it, if Mike Trout's salary is getting cut in more than 75%, there's more players that are making a lot of money that are really not going to be making that much money. Right? So the percentage has to be more than 20% of players being affected more than these owners. It has to be, right? Well, here's an interesting thing. So the Indians owners actually make they have the biggest net worth. It's $4.6 billion.
The Indians?
That is the Indians. You know who owns the team? I didn't know this till just right now. James Dolan's dad, the owner of the Knicks' father, owns the.
That's not fair. That shouldn't.
They have the most money. So you wonder why James Dolan's nepotism might affect him a little bit. Did not know that. It makes me hate him even more.
Right.
We hate James Dolan on the show, if you didn't know. We've had podcasts on him specifically just to crap all over James Dolan, if you haven't listened to this podcast before. So to hear that is a little interesting. But
it's disturbing is what it is.
It definitely is. But yeah, so Jared, I have a way that I think they could fix this issue. Let's say the players, it's a 51-49 vote, and some of these players get severely screwed on this. What would be your way of fixing this issue if this obviously only happens this season?
Well, I'm going to let you go first because I think I know what you're going to say. And I agree with what you're saying. Okay. So I'll let you take it.
So mine's easy. And again, I don't know how this works. I don't know how the contract language works, but let's say Mike Trout's, his contract, it gets cut to $8 million, right? I think the only fair thing to do would just to be recoup all that money through the length of his contract. I don't have his current contract in front of me right now, but let's say he has 8 more years on his contract, or let's say he has 7 more years on his contract. You just add $4 billion each year to his contract. So yes, there's going to be years where he's making 40, 42, $43 million, right? But that's only fair because you took $28 million one year. from his contract. So that would be my way. I can't see how that's, you know, you know what the MLB could do? You just raise the luxury tax, right? So it doesn't affect anybody. That might be kind of a socialist, communist way of looking at this, if I'm even saying that correctly, but that's how I would do it. I would just say, okay, this is the only season where this is going to happen. After this, everybody's contract is going to be recouped. You force the owners to recoup those contracts, whatever it is. I think it's that simple. But again, I don't know the way the contract language works. I think these players have essentially agreed upon that if there was a pandemic or if there was a giant disaster that affected most of the league, which we have right now, that 1 year those players are just going to have to suffer, and those contracts that they did pay won't actually make it to the end of what they expected. So, what are your thoughts on that? And do you have anything else that you could add to that as well?
I like that because I think that would probably push the players more on the side of getting this deal done. Right now, it's just straight up, you know, Mike Trout is going to lose, right? He's going to go from making 36 to 8 million. He's going to lose 28 million, right? He's not going to get that back. So my question is, because Major League Baseball has already lost so many games in this season, they can't recoup that money back either. So if I'm hearing you correctly, if you're asking for owners to basically repay these players at a later date, I think the owner's argument would be, okay, well, where are we going to get that money back from?
I'll say this. I'll make this even easier too, because the money, because I just looked at my own statistics over here, and I actually changed my mind on something. So remember, they've already agreed that, so Mike Trout will not make $36 million a year. Let me just say that right now. So there's really no discussing why we did the $36 million. But when we look at the grand scheme of things, Trout's contract's going to go from originally 36 at the beginning of the season now to 8. Realistically, it's actually 18 million to 8. Still a significant loss, more than 50%. But so here's the thing: if Mike Trout's contract gets bumped down to 8, why not just add $1 million per year? Right? That there's no way that will affect teams that much, adding $1 million to Mike Trout's current contract per year. Right? How could that possibly be breaking the bank? You move obviously the Angels have a lot of players they're under contract for a lot of money. Albert Pujols, Rendon, Mike Trout, just to name a few. So yes, this would be one of the teams that's severely affected by this. But all you're doing is adding $1 or $2 million a year each of those contracts. So Mike Trout's making 37 instead of 35. How is that really affecting these players that much, right? Like I believe this Trout will just lose $18 million, but if he knows he's going to get the $10 million that he originally lost just to play a season, how are the owners really going to argue that, right? Only giving about $1 million and less to most players per year extra.
Right. So, okay. So I've got some things spinning right now. So what if a player gets injured, a significant injury, ACL, Tommy John, something, and what happens if they end up retiring? They can't come back to play. Do they still get that money? And then the second thing, and this is something that I think is really interesting. I don't know the player's name, and I believe he used to play for the Mets. But every year until like 2035, the guy gets like $1.5 million. Like at a certain point, I think it's sometime in the summer. Yeah. He gets a check for like 1 point something million, right? So if a player, only plays 2 more years in the league, but he has lost, I don't know, $20 million or something like that, maybe owners come up with a plan to say, okay, even though you're retired, for the next 15 years or so, we're going to basically pay you in increments until we pay you
like a buyout, right? For example, a buyout. So Bobby Bonilla is a special case.
Okay? I knew you were going to know about
Bobby Bonilla, formerly the Mets. That deal was brokered in part by Bernie Madoff. So you can understand why that was so bad of a deal for the Mets. And again, I just mentioned the Mets currently have the second worst owner as far as net worth goes. Right? So that guy's really getting screwed by this.
Right.
So that's a little different case. Interesting fact, too. You mentioned that, the effect that this will have if a player retires. You know who the highest paid players are going to be this year, right, Jared? Do you know who they are? It's among others, Prince Fielder, who doesn't play anymore, Jacoby Ellsbury, who's not on the team, and many others that are that have either been bought out by teams of horrible contracts. So I do believe that if the MLB already is paying those players full contracts, then I think after a pandemic caused all this, they could agree to buy these players out essentially.
Interesting.
And give them. So I think that wouldn't be as harsh of a reality there. But hey, here's another thing. This would be the last topic we talk about in this here. So if I'm if I'm the agents, right, I go, hey, when I renegotiate a new contract with these guys, we're adding the money that they lost. And every agent just raises the bar on it. And the MLB is just like, damn it. So maybe if the owners want to get greedy, maybe the agents just fight them back and go, all right, well, I'm going to ask for $3 million in everybody's contract extra because you took that away from everybody. Right? Maybe that's the way you fight it.
Right? Okay. I could get on board with that. I mean, players aren't going to say no to that.
No, of course not.
Money from them.
Of course not. Yeah, it's going to be interesting, but I'm glad these statistics have come out though, because now it makes me understand why the Bryce Harpers and the Nolan Arenados came out earlier, and I believe Mike Trout even refused to more than likely take this deal because of how severely those guys' pay cuts are going to be. Again, it sounds ridiculous, but if a player was expecting to make $36 million, made investments, bought a brand new home, maybe bought a nice car, a couple, right, had a baby because they knew they're going to make a lot of money, cutting their salary by $28 million that year will affect them. It's 1 year, but you're talking about players potentially getting really affected. But a guy like Mike Trout, he has been making a lot of money, but nowhere near what you expect he's been making until this year. I believe this was the first year his new contract was supposed to kick in. So essentially, he's still making not what he deserves as being a once-in-generational player, the best player in the MLB. That guy really has a gripe here because he's like, man, I still even had my best contract. Then now you're going to take $20 million off of this? This is terrible, right? So, we hope these players have been, smart with their money. But again, you can't blame a guy for buying the nicest house in the neighborhood because he can. Right. Or investing money in stocks and stuff like that. So the players will be affected by this, even if you're like, well, they're still making $8 million. Well, you know what though? You live your life like you're making 30. Most people, not like you're making 8. Right. So it is different.
Here's something else that I just thought of as well. Now, from a player standpoint, this has nothing to do with Major League Baseball negotiations.
Yeah.
But I guarantee that owners have come to the table and said, well, these high profile players, or even you don't have to be high profile, what about their endorsement deals, right? Because I haven't really heard anything about those, but I would assume that most of these endorsement deals, players haven't really been taking pay cuts from that, right? Because, if you're Mike Trout and you're signed with Nike or whoever he's signed with, people can still go online and buy his merchandise, and that's not really cutting to his revenue. So I guarantee that owners have probably come to the table and said, okay, well, if you guys are going to be taking a pay cut here, you can still make it up with the endorsement deals that you have, which is a true statement. But I still think from a player standpoint, we're just talking about the Major League Baseball contracts. But I do think we have to mention also that certain players still have endorsement deals and money coming in other than baseball. I mean, look at a guy like Marshawn Lynch from the NFL, who has already come out and said, I have not spent one dime of the actual contract money that I've ever made as a player, whether it was with Buffalo, Seattle, or the Raiders. He said he has saved that money and only used his endorsement money to live off of.
True.
Right?
Yeah.
So that's very smart. Not every player does that, but I think you also have to bring that into consideration.
Yeah, and like you said, there's many people that are smart with their money. I remember always hearing that Jay Leno, the former Tonight Show host, has never spent a dime of his Tonight Show money. It's all been it was something else that he was making money off of, but he essentially does not spend that money. He might now in retirement because obviously he's not making any money for NBC anymore. But I remember hearing that deal as well. It's gonna be gonna be interesting. I know that baseball deals with say Nike are nowhere near the NBA's deals.
Well, no, because
so it's not as much as
popular. cleats in Major League Baseball, it's not the same.
What I'm saying though is there's not as many players as you think that are MLB that have big endorsements that are really going to affect it. The NBA, I don't want to hear those players complain because we know that essentially anybody with a shoe deal is. I've mentioned this too. One of the reasons I thought Kevin Durant went to the Golden State Warriors is because his number one employer was his shoe deal. It wasn't the NBA. So they, in a way, could kind of say, hey, we only want you to go to New York, LA, or this. You can't go to Charlotte or New Orleans. We don't want you to. So yeah, endorsement deals do affect it, but I think the MLB, it's not as much as you think. It's similar to like hockey or football. I assume the deals are big because you could do that. But again, yeah, it's all interesting. And Jared, I hope that they can come to a deal because I want to see baseball. I think baseball will be the easiest sport to watch without fans in some ways too. So it'll be relatively the most normal out of the sports without fans, right? And going back really quickly, just to mention this, so the NHL, back to the NHL stuff, there will be no fans more than likely for any of that. So regardless of, let's say the hub city is Dallas and Texas goes, you guys can have fans now in the arena. I still believe that like you don't need let's say, the New York Rangers and Chicago Blackhawks are in the finals. They don't want people from Chicago and New York flying to watch those games in Dallas, right? So no matter what, and I believe that will be the same with the NBA, maybe a little different with baseball if the playoffs start in October, November, right? Maybe you can potentially get fans in those games, but I think that, NHL and NBA will not have fans. So unfortunately, we won't get to see these playoffs with fans. It will be interesting. It will be less. It'll be felt less great when you win it, right? As a fan and as a player, but that's just what you got to deal with this year. But any last thoughts on the MLB or the NHL, Jared? As far as
listen, like I said in the very beginning, it's a positive sign that the NHL has come to this agreement and that there's an actual plan in place. Yeah. And like I said, I think for these other leagues and organizations, everyone's going to be looking at the NHL, right? And how are they doing, right? Is this a crash and burn, or is it successful? And these other leagues can take things from what the NHL is doing, implement it into their systems, and we can start to see more leagues open up. And, who knows, by July or potentially the beginning of August, we can actually see the NBA back, or we can see Major League Soccer, or we can have NFL teams actually in a training camp practicing on a field, getting ready for the games in September. So this is more than just hockey starting. This is also a platform and a way for other leagues to get going. So I'm very excited and optimistic, and hopefully this can go well for everyone involved.
And so just an interesting note to end this podcast on what kind of you just talked about. You look at, so now Serie A, let me see this. So the Premier League is set to start in about 3 weeks now. That's breaking news. That's obviously England, which I don't know the extent of the coronavirus over there, so I'm not going to speak on how they're doing this, but let me see this. I believe Italy is somehow starting their sports. The Serie A, the number one sports league or number one soccer league in Italy, is starting. So, again, we know how bad Italy was affected by this. If they can go on this and they're safe and their league ends up going well for a month before they're set to start on June 20th. If they're, excuse me, wait 1 second with that, my alarm going off right there. But if Italy's Premier Soccer League can go and start and be successful for a month without coronavirus, affecting it, I think the United States can, right? Because Italy, just projecting, but like that was the worst affected country, and the fact that they're starting their soccer league gives me hope that the United States will be fairly safe when they return.
I hope so. I mean, the one thing I do want to point out is that in my last thought, now yours, we both said a lot of ifs. There were a lot of ifs there involved. There's a lot of potentially, or if this happens, then this. So, you know what I mean? Like we're excited, we're optimistic, we're hopeful, but still a lot of ifs to work out and situations that need to be overcome.
Yeah, and again, we talked about the NHL and MLB. The only thing we know from this podcast is that the NHL will have a 24-team playoff. That's it. Everything else is relative and has not been decided yet. Our next podcast, we will likely discuss the NBA and what their plans are. We're hearing rumors of Disney World and possibly the wide world of sports hosting the entire NBA sometime in July. We'll update you on the NHL. We'll update you on MLB. I believe by our next podcast, they will have either accepted or rejected this deal, the MLB Players with the owners, and obviously anything else that comes up. But Jared, we're getting closer and closer to sports. I'm glad we could actually talk about the beginning of something, right?
Right.
So
yeah, no, we're getting a little more. It's not just ifs. We can actually start talking about what happens if, oh, hey, there's a game on next week, 7:00. Tune in. That's
exactly. Closer. And like I mentioned earlier, if you just kind of slip by, there are betting odds for the NHL now, which is nice. You can literally go bet that, on the teams that you think will win this 24-team Stanley Cup playoffs. That's, almost as official as you get, right? Like if you can start betting on sports that weren't supposed to be back at that point, we're a step closer. But yeah, so hey, we'll be back next week. But for this week, I'm Nenad.
I'm Jared Smith.
And this has been the Cover 2 podcast. See you guys next week.